Hello and welcome to subpart 5.4 of the BMS modding tutorial series. In this video I will introduce you to internal aircraft guns. Guns are essentially weapons, and as such, from a database perspective, they consist of the typical 3 database record entries under class table, weapons control data, and sim weapons data. What you don't need for an internally mounted gun, inevitably, is an external 3D model and corresponding textures, and guns don't have a dedicated weapon data file either. So we have the BMS editor opened under the weapons parameter weapons subtabs, that's so to speak the content of the weapons control data XML file, and the vast majority of guns, if not all, are named in a specific way, starting with the caliber of the gun, followed by the name of the gun. Okay, let's take the example of the 27mm BK-27 cannon of the EF-2000 aircraft. In the main part 5.0, I've already explained the respective fields in this weapon data file. Just as a brief recap, here in the top section you have essentially not more than 2 checkboxes ticked. Ammo is 1/10. This one supposedly meant that if it's unticked, ammunition is displayed with an accuracy of 1 round, but in-game it doesn't really work. And the other one is tracer. If this option is ticked, then you see tracers when the gun is fired, and otherwise, if it's unticked, then you will see no tracers. Weight and drag data are not applicable for internally mounted guns. At least you have a range value defined, a damage value. Damage type is typically kinetic for guns. Guidance is visual. Fire rate is still not really fully understood by me. What you can observe, however, is that the vast majority of guns are having a value greater than 1 defined. Same for bullet TTL, so bullet time to leave, I would guess, but this 4 would imply 4 seconds, and there's definitely not a 4 seconds delay, so I'm not entirely sure how this is being processed by the code. Bullet dispersion is simply the area across which bullets are dispersed, so the smaller this value, the more accurate is the gun. For air-to-ground attacks, that's certainly better. For air-to-air, a certain level of dispersion can't harm, however. You have the bullet speed, so to speak, the muzzle velocity, and the rounds per second. As you can see, there are no seekers defined, because the gun is an unguided weapon. If we open the corresponding class table record entry, what you can notice here in the graphics section is that there is a null displayed in the normal field, where typically the external 3D model number would be displayed. In this case we have no model, so the number is 0. That's true for essentially all of the objects in the database that have no corresponding 3D model. What is noteworthy is that the vast majority of guns is using the sim weapon data index number 43, so there is a sim weapons data index number required, but it can be shared by the vast majority of guns. Here is a trainable option at the top. Allows you to switch the trainable options on and off. So on the stores management system format of the MFD, you have the training TRNG mnemonic displayed on the right side, and you can toggle it on and off, but it currently has no effect because it's not implemented in BMS at the moment. The rest of the entries here should be kept as they are, so there's no need to adjust or change them. Of course, you can create your own sim weapons data record entry if you are creating a new gun, but it's probably not stringently necessary, and is described in subpart 5.1. If you want to create a new gun to the database, then simply right click on an existing gun entry, ideally one that closest match your own new intended guns, and click on add weapon copy, and ask you whether you also want to duplicate the class table. Do so, and so you have already created 2 out of 3 database record entries that are required. It's always added to the end here. The name is modified with a hashtag in front of it, so you would need to edit this and then edit other properties as required. The CT data record is automatically linked, so in this case we don't really have to do anything. So it's the quickest way to create a new gun if you want to add a new gun because the one you like to see doesn't exist in the database. The major difference of guns compared to other weapons is how those guns are assigned to an aircraft. You do this on an aircraft basis. So you go to the vehicles tab, aircraft, and then you select an aircraft with a gun, or if you have added a new aircraft to the database and need to set it up, you can of course select it if you have opened it, in this case the A10A. What you can see here under the weapons tab is a slot 0, and the slot 0 is actually used by the gun, so anytime you create a new aircraft, first add the gun if the aircraft has a gun, and you do so by simply add weapon. In this case it appears here at the bottom, and you could now select the gun you want, not very well visible in the small field, doesn't matter here for the moment, and it displays already the record number. And what you are doing now is to define the number of gun rounds. So let's take 50. 50 means actually 500, so it must always be multiplied by 10. The value that you enter here, these 2 options are not required at all. And if you have selected it, you can view the corresponding database record entry by opening it. Okay, we probably need to save first, and it should now correctly link to the respective weapon data. So that's important. Generally, you can of course add multiple weapons, but as far as I know, you cannot have multiple guns on an aircraft, but I haven't tested it, to be honest. So in the most cases, you typically create the gun first, here at the top, slot 0, and as it is defined for most aircraft that have, for example, 2 guns, then simply a gun entry is created that simply duplicates the numbers, and especially in terms of firing rate, and you would here enter the appropriate increased number of gun rounds. If you have 2 guns with an ammunition capacity of 150, you would actually enter twice that, so 300 or 30 in this case, as the quantity is multiplied with 10 as previously described. Okay, then what's unique to guns is that you have a lot of aircraft specific gun entries defined in the aircraft data file under sim AC data. Easiest is to select edit and search, and then you enter gun. So we can look here, we are in the avionics section, and here you can define which air-to-air gun sights are being used by the aircraft. So you have only the F-16's gun sights, EEGS, SLC, LCOS, and SNAP. So true means this gun sight is available, false means it is not available, and there was, as far as I recall, somewhere also an entry that allowed you to define the default. Okay, then what you can also set here is the sounds. So if there is a specific sound for guns that you want to use, you can define this one. These are start, loop, and end sound file numbers. And here in this section further down you can define the gun location, and that's the location where gunfire will occur relative to the external 3D model. Okay, the gun trail ID and gun effect are supposedly impacting the visual appearance of the gun tracers. If you have tracers enabled, you can actually also set gun elevation and gun azimuth direction. 0 indicates it's normally aligned with bore sight, and the can do strafe implies that you can strafe ground targets with the gun. I'm not entirely sure whether it enables or disables the air to ground strafe function for player flown aircraft. It might well be just for AI controlled aircraft, defining that AI controlled aircraft are using the gun also to strafe ground targets. This next entry here is the typical altitude from which the gun or rockets are employed by AI controlled aircraft, so you can define the normal firing altitude, minimum, maximum, and that's it. Basically, as far as gun specific entries in the aircraft data file are concerned, and you have to set this up, or you can also set this up for every single aircraft. So you need to take this into account, especially if you are creating a new aircraft. Then you definitely need to define the appropriate position with respect to the external 3D model. So in order to define the position of the gun, it's always helpful if you enable the debugging functions in the Falcon BMS CFG configuration file. Here at the bottom you have the debug development settings, so it's helpful if you enable this activate debug stuff, okay, and can't hurt if you also enable the development callbacks. What's also required is that you set here within the launcher the appropriate debug function enabled. So we are now in the simulation with a Typhoon. As you can see here, there in the right wing root is the gun, so if we fire the gun, gunfire can be observed there. Let's pause for a moment. In this case, we have opened the external 3D model in the model viewer of the editor. What's important in this respect is these colored lines indicate the X, Y, Z axis, and the center point is also the center point of the model. So if you are defining locations, they are always defined relative to the model. So let's open the aircraft data file in this respect. So what you can see here in locations is it's x 10.5 feet. That means here from the center position plus 10.5 feet until here. Then we have the y position, that in this case means to the right, plus means to the right, minus would be to the left. So 3.2 feet to here, and at the moment we have Z position, that means in this case 0.9 feet downwards from this center position. Okay, that's important to note. If we would now, for example, change this value to, let's say, 1.2, you would have to save. And when we go back to the sim, then we open the chat window with Shift plus T, AC aux reload. It's somewhat moved downwards, so maybe we increase this a little bit for better visibility. You always need to save if you make the change. see it has changed. So this feature AC aux reload allows you to edit your aircraft data file in them and reload it, but it only applies to the so-called additional data section, and the additional data section is of course not the entire file. It essentially begins after the data section for the aircraft. So we are already beyond that point here. So the aux arrow means the auxiliary aircraft data section starting here, and it extends either to the end of the file if we have an original flight model, or it's more or less over somewhere after this particular section here with some PS heat name settings. So it follows the external light definitions that can be set here, and sounds and so on. And when you have reached here, then the aux AC section is over. That just for information. So if you cannot actually measure the position where the gun is located on the actual aircraft, you can of course roughly estimate it based on the model center position, and if you know the dimensions of the real aircraft that you are working with, then you of course have a rough idea where it should be, and then you simply try with gunfire so you can locate where gunfire occurs from. So there on you have to move and manually edit if you have no other means. Of course, if you are the owner of the original 3D model, then you can easily within the modeling program define the position or find the position, and then you can simply adopt the values for the distance XYZ to the gun location. So that's everything with regards to the gun. I hope I didn't forget anything, so hope you find this video useful, and then stay tuned for the next video. See you then, bye.